Okay, now it's time to talk about some global issues, which mostly are secondary pollutant effects from primary pollutants that are being made on just nationwide and continental scales. First, acid rain. You don't hear as much about acid rain these days, and that's partly because of the decline in the use of coal to produce electricity. So it's not as big a problem here, but it is a huge problem in some other countries. Um, Nitrogen oxides from automobile exhaust and sulfur oxides from smokestacks and diesel combustion mix with water droplets in the rain to form nitric and sulfuric acid. This is a secondary effect now of the primary pollutants, which are the nitrogen oxides. Cars and industry has gotten better at not producing the nitrogen and sulfur oxides. And that's why acid rain has slightly declined in some areas of the world. The acids that accumulate in the rain will come down in the rain and they will run into lakes. Now, if the lakes are a granite based lake, which was what you often find in the mountains, the pH of the water, the acidity of the water will go down as the hydrogen ion concentration goes up, and that will kill most of the life in the lake. Um, the the damage in the air comes to trees at higher altitude. The at high altitude, trees are more vulnerable, especially to acid rain droplets that are found in the air, and so they call it acid fog. And so trees at higher altitudes in the mountains that are downwind from industrial areas that produce a lot of nitrogen and sulfur oxide suffer because of the low pH of the acid droplets on the needles, leaches materials out of the leaves. Another problem in the Rocky Mountains, the acid rain that falls in the form of snow actually runs into the groundwater supply, which then goes through the numerous mining shafts that have been created all over the Rocky Mountains to find precious metals. Those acid rain tunnels is what they become, leach toxic metals from those mines and run it into the neighboring rivers. There are some rivers like the upper Arkansas that are completely now unsafe to drink because of the acid rain effect leaching toxic metals out of neighboring mines. Um, so the effects of acid rain, the secondary effects of acid rain, can be whole nations and continents away from the source of the primary pollutant. We have some acid rain effect here in the United States from the activities that are going on in China. And as China continues to develop, that's only going to get worse as winds from the far east travel over the Pacific and come to North America. Next, global climate change. Global climate change is a secondary effect from primary pollutant. We think the planet is warming due to the excess carbon dioxide and methane and freons that we've released into the air. Combustion in automobile combustion, like burning gasoline in a car, produces massive amounts of carbon dioxide just taking a short trip to school. CO2 levels have been rising since the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of burning of coal. CO2 reflects heat back to the earth and it holds heat in, so the earth doesn't cool as much during the day and especially at night when the heat should be radiating out to space. What we have seen for sure is that the ice caps appear to be melting at the North and the South Pole, and places like Glacier National Park are losing all their glaciers. The glaciers are receding dramatically. We should see coastlines eroding homes and buildings away as the sea levels rise because a significant amount of water on Earth is trapped in ice and it is melting. Storms are predicted to become more violent, and they have been, and climates are going to change worldwide as rainfall patterns change as a result of the planet warming. So it's a big question mark. We don't know what's going to happen as a result of global climate change, but we are worried about what could happen as a result of global climate change. Next, the ozone hole, which I've just read is actually starting to shrink now. Freons, which are air conditioning and refrigeration gases, produced in the 1960s and 70s, went up in the upper atmosphere, and unbeknownst to us initially, they were contributing to the destruction of the ozone there. So the world switched away from using the original freons and switched to a new kind of freon that wouldn't affect the atmosphere as dramatically. And the ozone holes that had been appearing over the South Pole, especially, and a little bit over the North Pole, have begun to close up. If the ozone from the upper atmosphere disappears, life on Earth, at least on the land, will completely disappear because plants cannot sustain unfiltered sunlight on their leaves. With all the ultraviolet light coming from the sun, the the leaves will wither and die. We will not be able to grow crops. So the ozone hole is actually starting to disappear. What ozone is actually oxygen gas that has reacted with itself to form O3. O3 is ozone, O2 is oxygen gas. Ozone is toxic to you, but when it's way up in the upper atmosphere, it's healthy because it absorbs ultraviolet light. That's this wavy line here as it's streaming into the atmosphere. Now, when that happens, the ozone becomes oxygen, but becomes this. But then ultraviolet light hitting the oxygen reforms more ozone. So the activity of oxygen and ozone in the upper atmosphere is a good thing. The only problem is if ozone is beginning to disappear from the upper atmosphere, then there is not as much of an ultraviolet screen up there as we've had, and more UV light's going to come to the ground, and that's not good for us. Next, water pollution comes in a variety of types. Only 3% of the world's total water is fresh water, and only a small fraction of that is actually drinkable. We, as humans, do direct chemical contamination of water by releasing pesticides, soaps, fertilizers, petroleum products directly into the water supply. This is the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. They were attempting to burn off the oil that was on the surface of the ocean here. That direct addition of oil will be felt in the Gulf for decades to come. The cleanup probably got 75% of the oil, but there's still a significant amount of oil on the ocean floor and on the surface that has not yet been cleaned up. This is chemical contamination in a creek. The fact that you can see all these suds on the water indicates that somewhere upstream somebody is adding some kind of soaps to the water, and it's probably killing all the life, in the creek. In addition to those types of water pollution, there's also human fecal waste, sewage. Sewage is biodegradable, but obviously it's dangerous to drinking water. Excess bacteria from raw sewage can rob oxygen from water and suffocate fish, and obviously raw sewage is not humanly drinkable. Sewage contains a number of household cleaning chemicals because people dump stuff down the drain, so that mixes with the sewage. That's also toxic to life. Cities create massive amounts of sewage that must be treated before release. But I want to point out that hog farms and intensive cattle farms can produce a single hog farm can produce more waste than all the people in Kansas City and St. Louis combined per day. So it's not just people making sewage, it's chickens, it's cows, it's turkey, and it's pigs that are producing massive amounts of sewage that we have to do something with. So sewage can also contain parasites. If people are sick and they get diarrhea, those parasites go into the sewage stream, and obviously you don't want those getting back to people. So in the United States, we treat sewage before it can actually contaminate water supplies, but in many countries, sewage is not treated, and that's how many people get sick. They are drinking water that's contaminated with sewage with parasites in it from other people that were sick. So it's kind of disgusting, but that's the way it is worldwide. In addition to putting chemicals in water and sewage in water, there's also heat that we throw in water. Thermal pollution is where power plants use a body of water as a cooling system. And what happens then is that the water that they take from a lake, which may be 55 degrees, is returned to the lake at 80 degrees. And that can slowly warm the lake, and it can prevent the lake from turning over. Every year in Missouri, lakes turn over twice. If you prevent that turnover, the water at the bottom of the lake will become so anoxic and so deprived of oxygen that all life there will die. So fish suffocations have occurred in some lakes because of the lack of spring and fall turnover. So this is thermal pollution flowing into San Francisco Bay from a power generation station. And this is a typical coal-fired power plant. You have to use water, which is the best medium for cooling the turbines that are producing the electricity. But there's the problem then is if you discharge that warm water into a standing water system, you're going to have a problem. Lastly, ocean pollution is a huge problem. This is the Deepwater Horizon oil rig that was on fire. Here's typical beach pollution in some places out in the Pacific, on islands in the Pacific, where just random plastic washes ashore. There are regions in the Central Pacific that are so polluted with plastic that it just litters the surface of the ocean. Here's ocean pollution washed in probably by a storm. For a long time, many countries, including the United States, have been simply dumping garbage offshore over the edge of the continental shelf. And a lot of that garbage will float, and it comes back to uh, the, the continent due to wave action. Now, what's going on out there? What's the fate of the earth here? So, as far as resources are concerned, resources are things that we need from the earth. Renewable resources are things that nature makes. We tend to deplete them faster than nature can make them, but forests and wildlife are renewable resources. As long as we harvest them at tolerable levels, they'll keep making more of themselves. Non-renewable resources we're using at a very alarming rate, things like petroleum products and metals and glass. And there aren't enough processes underway right now to reclaim metals, and we are indiscriminately using many petroleum products. We are now just beginning to use light and wind to produce significant amount of electricity, but we have a long way to go as far as energy processing and resources. Forests are renewable resources. Trees slow the fall of rain on the soil and reduce the effects of rain and erosion. So taking trees from a landscape can have a very major impact on the quality of the system, because all the topsoil will wash away, and then the resulting forest that will try to grow back will never reach the grandeur of the original forest that was cut down. Right now, deforestation is a major problem, especially in rainforest regions in the world. But there are areas, India, for example, is attempting to reforest huge sections of its landscape that were felled because of the use of the trees for wood. Endangered species are a real problem. We are losing species for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're overhunted. Sometimes the species habitat is taken away as we cut down the trees for use of the trees. Sometimes it's a toxic pollutant that's destroying the species. So endangered species included things like the grizzly bear and the California condor here. And at one time, the North American bison was endangered. Overhunting has been a problem. Biological magnification, which is pollutant problem. Habitat loss are putting many species either at the brink or past the brink. About one plant or animal species is becoming extinct per hour worldwide. Most of them are rather obscure and you don't hear about them. So the biodiversity of planet Earth is on the decline. Genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity are the only way that life is going to survive on the planet, and those are definitely on the decline. The California condor it's the largest wingspan bird in the world. It was brought back from extinction because the last surviving members were brought in captivity, and captive breeding programs saved the species. This is a bison skull heap from the plundering of the great bison herds back in the 1860s and 1870s. Today, we have only a small fraction of the original bison population that was on the Great Plains. This is the extinct Carolina parakeet. Doesn't look that much dissimilar from Max. Notice the large parrot beak and the colorful body. These birds were completely eradicated for use of their feathers in hats. It was a fancy thing to have a Carolina parakeet feather in your hat, a feather in the hat, so to speak. And the Carolina parakeet is now extinct. Why save these things? Because They produce useful products for us, drugs, antibiotics, and painkillers. They have a right to live on a planet where they've evolved. And they represent a genetic reserve for themselves and to help other species as being parts of the food chain and parts of the world. Another problem we've got worldwide is moving species around, invasive species. If you take a species from one continent, bring it home and plant it in your backyard, that may not be a good idea. Species that are not normally found in an area can become a problem if they gain access to a new area. That's because nothing may eat them, so therefore they can outcompete the native species. For example, bush honeysuckle. It's not that bush honeysuckle is that aggressive growing of a plant. The problem with it is nothing eats it here. As a result of that, it can grow indiscriminately. All native plants get fed upon by bugs and deer and other animals, and as a result, they have a negative impact on them. But bush honeysuckle grows without any of that competition, and as a result, it outcompetes and wins and wipes out all the native plants. So native species are negatively affected by all kinds of things, symbiosis, predation, competition, whereas the invasive species doesn't have all that stuff taking a toll on it. Non-native species have no predators, no parasites, no intense competitors in their introduced areas. Invasive species thus can grow exponentially and extinguish out native species where they compete. Examples of these that are now a problem are the snakehead, the Asian carp. The snakehead's a fish. The Asian carp, which is a fish, bush honeysuckle, which is a plant, zebra mussels, which are little mollusks, kudzu, which is a plant, and many, many more. This is a North American beaver dam, which is a serious invasive species in South America, because all of these trees in this bottomland area can't survive in this wetland that the beavers have made as a result of building the dam. And so as a result of that, the whole landscape is a series of dead and dying trees. Now, that would not be true here in Missouri. Many trees are adapted to have their roots flooded, but not so in Terra del Fuego in southern South America. So beavers there are a problem, beavers here are not. Here's Chinese kudzu covering an entire forest around Atlanta, Georgia. And then here's a signal crayfish. It's a North American species that's very invasive in Europe. They have their own crayfish species, but the introduction of the signal crayfish, which was used for like food bait, has caused their own species to decline. Likewise, the zebra mussel has wiped out species of native mussels here in North America, again, because it doesn't have any competition. So the future of the biosphere is resting now on conservation actions. There are many groups dedicated to saving the earth from the ills of human development. People like the Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, the World Wildlife Fund, the National Parks Conservation Association, and then just individuals that are fighting to recycle and reuse resources. Even here at NARICS, the recycling program helps to save the Earth's resources and cut down fewer trees, etc., etc. The fate of the Earth will be determined by human behavior in the next decade to two as we teeter on the brink of 8 billion people covering the planet.